Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective, Two Therapists, Moms with a Mic. My name is Katie Truax.
And I'm Claudia Glassman. It is such a mouthful to say that. We need to
I
shorten
know.
our name.
I know. And I feel like I say it wrong or different at least every time.
I might too.
I love it.
That's who we are.
I love it. I did hear you say it the other day, one day, and I was like, oh, is that how it's supposed to be said?
Two therapist moms and a mic.
Okay.
But
Therapist moms. Like therapist is the adjective that goes before moms, not like a separate noun.
Correct.
Okay. I'm with you. Now I know the name of our podcast. That's good
but
stuff.
I feel like it should be like something, I don't know, shorter. It's a mouthful.
Probably too late to change it now. I mean, we could change it. We can do whatever we want to.
Maybe we should just say, maybe we should keep the title. I'm going to think out loud on a podcast because everyone wants to hear our thought process. But maybe we should keep the title, but just like the intro being like from our perspective.
Okay. I'm down for that.
Just to shorten it because
I also like the idea of two therapists with a mic.
Yeah, where were you? What is it like?
I don't know.
18 podcasts ago.
Overwhelmed. I'm like, yeah, whatever you think's fine with me. It sounds good to me.
I mean, yeah.
We should vote, but we don't have enough listeners to vote yet.
Can the three of you please submit your votes?
I love you. I love it. Your child. Does your mother listen? What's our listener base? Today we're going to be talking about letting our children mess up, i.e., also maybe experience mess, right? Or sit in messy situations, navigate messes intentionally, right?
Yes.
Which I think is such a really, it's a tricky thing, you know. And I want to hear, this was Claudia's idea, this topic, and I want to hear, Claudia, like what was the impetus for this for you? Like what kind of brought this to your mind? I know for me, this is something that I think I've shared with you. We're really wrestling with the right school environment for Ellie right now. And this comes into play a lot, not as much around the idea of like her making a mistake per se, but the idea of like, how much do we shelter versus how much do we let her be exposed? And I could talk about that for so long. But so when you brought this topic up, I was like, oh yeah, this is such a good one.
Yeah.
So, and I could also think, with our older kid, who'll be 24 in December, ways in which we've reflected back on, did we do enough of this with him, right? And could we have done more, and how might that have affected his growth and development, yada, yada, yada. So what brought this topic to mind for you that feels like it's such a 100% yes for me to want to talk about today?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Some of it's just conversations I've had in the last week with various people about parenting and young adults that are struggling with adulthood because they don't know how to navigate danger, challenges, fear, anxiety, things that aren't orchestrated for them, right?
Right.
To be honest with you, like as a parent, my instinct is to never have my kids hurt, be upset, or you know what I mean? Like it is hard, as the parent in me is very aware of the daily struggle of having to resist the urge to dive in and rescue every time, right? Because there's so many lessons in failure, in messing up, in figuring stuff out for yourself.
Yeah.
And I know that the therapist part of me is like, yes, like for your own growth, whether you're, thinking about your children in adulthood or your children next year, just that is part of the development, right? To kind of be able to figure those things out. And my understanding that as parents, like it's not really our job to control the crap out of our children, but it's our job to guide them. And in guiding them, sometimes we have to let them experience danger, risk, right?
Yeah.
But how do you do that in a way when the parent side of me is like, oh my God, that's terrifying, And I think it's just a constant struggle. And in my talk with other parents, it's a struggle we all have, right? But I see the fallout.
Yeah.
when with the best of intentions, someone is sheltered to the max and protected. And every time they mess up, there's a call to the teacher about how do we fix the grades. And every time they do, and they're learning nothing, and they become adults and they can't function. Like really are not functioning at an appropriate level because they don't have the skills.
Mhm.
I was also scrolling through Instagram or something, and there's a therapist I follow, and she had lost her son, and one of the posts she had was kind of about this topic, and she's like, I can't replay anything in my mind that I could have done different to save his life, kind of thing, right? She's like, and now there's another child who's about to learn to drive, and that's anxiety provoking. And it was this idea of like, even with all the safety precautions in place and having, all the things you should do as a parent, like you can't realistically prevent all that, like everything from happening. You know what I mean? Like there are things that are just going to happen, that is part of life. And so how do you parent
Mhm.
when you're aware of dangers and you have anxieties around your children's health and well-being, but in a way where you can allow your children to experience life? Because sometimes we can hamper our kids with our intention to protect them.
Okay, so like there's several issues here, right? There's like the topic that we originally put on the table, which was letting our kids mess up, right? Like make mistakes, try their hand at things and fail without rescuing them.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have like the topic of safety, which is related, but not always the same.
It depends on, well, I think the older the children, the bigger the mistakes
Mm-hmm.
potentially, right?
Yeah.
Like, so example, like your kids failing school.
Right.
That can be a mistake that they have to dig their way out of for a while. Maybe they don't graduate on time. Maybe they don't get into college. Maybe right? That can be like a several year journey to course correct that. That's really hard to sit in as a parent.
Oh yeah. Or things that are life threatening.
Yeah.
Right? Like drug use or um oh gosh, other reckless behaviors.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
we have
Driving aggressively. I don't know, right? Like you name it.
yeah, totally. Right. Drinking too much,
Yeah.
having unprotected sex, right? Like the crazy things we talk about older kids. Um and then even as little ones, like I remember thinking in my head, right? Like as a mom to say like a toddler, how much could this hurt her, right? As a decision maker, right? If this could hurt a little bit, I'll let her do it. But if this could hurt a lot, it's a no.
Yeah.
And again, to that same vein of trying to let her learn what her body's like, what she's capable of, what the environment will do or not do to support her or to punish her, right? And again, learning from those lessons. Okay, so we have making mistakes, safety issues, and then there's also this idea of responsibility, right? And maybe a spin-off on that is what you said earlier, this like how to navigate the world as an adult, take responsibility for yourself, deal with difficult situations, and have that resiliency to kind of keep going, to get back up because you've had to navigate hard things in the past.
Right. Yes. And like it's temporary, right? That one hard situation, one hard
Mm-hmm.
moment is not necessarily a forever situation.
Because you've been through hard in the past that
Exactly.
has not been forever.
That's right.
Right.
And I
And you
think,
learn from that.
and the hard thing to explain, because I think, we talked a little bit, it made it sound kind of segmented, like older children, bigger problems, right? More risk. But the ability to navigate challenging
Mm-hmm.
situations starts when they're young.
Yeah.
Like you can't start at 16 and take a kid that was totally sheltered and be like, go, okay, like
Right.
you haven't built up to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You haven't built up to giving them a little bit of independence when they're young, in maybe a more controlled environment, right? Where you still
Yeah.
have a little more influence than you do when they're 16 or 17, right? Or even 18 to 20. Like, let's face it, people make bad choices at 22. They're adults
Totally.
legally, but like brain development wise, like you're still an adolescent, right?
Right.
So, I think it starts sooner. And it starts with like small things, right? Small risk, small failures,
Mhm.
so that they learn those skills and navigating them. And they're not like, their first failure isn't, at 24
Catastrophic.
years old when they just
Yeah,
now they really don't have the skill set to manage.
right. I
Yeah.
see this is so like in my face right now. Let me see if I can share a little bit of self-disclosure without like painting my oldest in a bad light. But I'll just say the quick and dirty is that he'll be 24 next or this month, actually, December. We're officially in December now, December 1st. He'll be 24. So what is it they say the brain develops at 25? We're done developing? I don't know. They keep extending that.
It was 22. Yeah. They're like, it's going to be like, you're never done.
We don't really know. You're never done cooking. Yeah, but he was this really interesting kiddo where for a long time we used as almost like a badge of honor and just a pride for him that he didn't need a lot of discipline as a child. He kind of innately was motivated to do quote unquote good, to kind of do the quote unquote right thing, to follow the rules, so forth, so on. And we try to instill responsibility with things like household chores and so forth and so on. But when it came to consequences for behavior, we didn't have a lot of opportunity to instill that or implement that in our home because he didn't break the rules, right? I remember one time in his 18 years of being under the parental roof where he had a consequence for a decision that he broke a rule, and he was punished for that. And one time, one time. And so fast forward, he was the kid who, okay, now we're out of the nest, and he got into a whole heck of a mess of trouble. Kind of one thing after another from maybe 18 on up. And kind of, at that point, it's you're really straddling an interesting line as a parent, because that child's no longer in your home. They're no longer your responsibility legally. And yet, you know that they still need you. They still need your support. They need your wisdom. They need your advice. They might need your money, right?
Yeah.
And so trying to navigate all those scenarios with him. Well, Rob and I look back and you know, one of the things that we realized that somehow slipped through the cracks or fell under the radar for us, and I think I've mentioned on here before, we co-parented with his biological mother and stepfather. I'm his stepmother, married to his biological father. So there's 4 parents in the mix, and 4 good parents, 4 good humans raising this good boy. And none of us ever made him get a job. And he was such a good kid. He did so much. He was so involved in the church and through the church into the community, and so involved with family. Again, never got in trouble. I don't know if it like never crossed our minds, or if like he was so busy doing other things that fell to the bottom of the priority list. But now, as we look at him as a soon to be 24-year-old, and some of the areas where he's still struggling, feeling like, well, shoot, maybe we really did him a disservice by not pushing that harder, right? Because some of the lessons that could have been learned by getting outside of the house, going into an environment where somebody else is your boss that's not your parent, and there's expectations and requirements like timeliness and a certain level of hygiene and interpersonal skills and communication and reliability and responsibility and the ability to handle situations that come up that are unpredictable depending on the job situation you're in, whether it's retail or hospitality, right? I mean, I remember waiting tables and I felt like, oh God, it's like somebody threw me in the fire here, right? Because all of a sudden I had so much, it felt like responsibility during that 5-hour shift. People expected so much from me, which, as adults, you look back, you're like, it's just food. But you remember kind of what that, did you ever wait tables? You did, didn't you?
I bartended.
You
like,
bartended. So
like
talk
most
about
therapists would.
expectations. Yeah. Right. So anyway, like
I just had to listen to people tell me their problems. It's not so different. It was
oh
very
my
much
gosh,
like therapy
I
before
love that.
therapy with fear involved.
But all the pressure, right? That pressure of like, there's so many people waiting on me to get them what they want right now. And that if I don't do it, they're going to be mad at me. right? I mean, if you think about like that paradigm of a job environment and how much that grows you as a person to figure out how to time manage and deal with your own emotions and deal with people who are happy or not happy with you, right? Based on circumstances you may or may not be able to control, and the ways in which that grows you as a human. So that's an example of how I can look at what you're talking about and saying like, did we consciously rescue him from having to experience that? No. But did we not push him into an environment where he could have learned really powerful things? Yeah. And I think that's a way that we really messed up by not making him go into this challenging situation.
Interesting. So yeah,
Mhm.
so part of your take on it is not only not diving into rescue when those situations come up, but creating a little bit of discomfort potentially for your children, right? So
Yeah.
that they are put in situations where they will grow, where they will be challenged, instead of letting them
Yes.
just take the easy way or what they're
In
always
the
good at.
comfortable way. That's right.
And it is hard. I think sometimes, and I think when you sit and look back, it's really
Yeah.
easy to say woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? Like now you can
Totally.
analyze it from a distance. Because I think for you guys, that situation didn't necessarily happen organically, but I can think of a lot of ways where that just kind of happens. Your kids playing a sport and they're not that
Mhm.
good, right? So they don't get the same play time,
Right.
or they try out for a team and they don't make it, or they're trying out for a theater production and they get like chorus, whatever. Like
Yeah.
you have a lot of like disappointments like that tend to organically happen that you don't necessarily have to cultivate,
Uh-huh.
right? You just have to sit in it with your child and be like, that sucks, right? Sometimes someone's better than us. Someone gets the lead role and we don't. Like you kind of
Right.
sit in those moments. But it's interesting because what you're saying is in your situation, like those things just didn't even present themselves necessarily. Like they weren't happening enough or regularly
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm. I guess so.
yeah.
And
That's
I
hard
think,
to catch in the moment though,
yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
I,
Because it's not a crisis, right? I think as parents sometimes, and we get so busy too, and not just parents, but any human, like any adult, right? We're so busy. Don't you ever feel like sometimes it's like we're just constantly putting out about output fires, right? Like what's the thing that's screaming at me the loudest, right?
yeah, for
Like
sure. Yeah.
the bathtub needs to be clean. Like I've got to take care of that, right? Like it's ASAP, right? Versus having the space and the time to sit back and really think big picture about planning not only your life and your family's life, but like, okay, how is my child doing big picture? Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? And what can I do, if anything, to help support the strengths and then strengthen the areas of weakness for them?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, right? To see like what areas, maybe your child's avoiding something.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a lot easier to influence when they're younger. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think some kids are more risk averse than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just disposition wise. And I think this is where it is in our best interest to really know our kids and be honest to ourselves, with ourselves about
Yeah.
our children's actual temperament and not who we want them to be. Because
Mm-hmm.
you do have kids that will naturally take more risks. I'm like, I'll try anything once and see what happens. And if I'm not good at it, okay. Like they naturally do that for themselves. And then you have kids that are a little more sensitive, or just that's not what they're going to gravitate towards, so they're not going to try out for something that they don't feel like they can do,
Yeah.
and they're not going to naturally push themselves. So I think you're right, like maybe there is a lesson kind of looking back um in noticing, like, do I need to assist my child in finding more
Mm-hmm.
areas of potential growth, right, and
Yeah.
discomfort and challenge? Are they always kind of taking the easier way, or only gravitating towards things that they're comfortable with and they know? Because that's human too. We tend to do that. Like people don't
Mm-hmm.
like to feel uncomfortable,
Sure.
you know? Um, and then how do I facilitate that
Mm-hmm.
if that's
Yeah.
the case? If they're not, but I think you can try it. Like, I don't know. I think there's lots of creative ways to try. It doesn't have to be some like huge life circumstance. It can be like,
Yeah.
let's all as a family go eat a food we don't know and
Sure.
try to
Sure.
order and take a
Yep.
risk and see what
Yep.
happens. And then you
Yep.
find out it's super spicy. Oops, right? Like, I don't know, right? But there are
Mm-hmm.
ways you can promote that that are,
Yeah.
you know,
I
maybe
love that.
we should be on board with a little bit more, right? Because I think that's, you know, we're setting a model too. And
Mhm.
what are we taking? Do we sit in our comfort zone? Or do we try things we don't know how to do? Or
Yeah.
how do we handle failure?
Yes.
You
And I
know?
think that that's so important for kids, right? And that's this, I was so thinking that same word when you said the word model. I remember Dr. Ken Matheny's class from grad school. I learned so much from that one little class. And one of the things he said, well, if you ever have a client who struggles with perfectionism, the most important thing the therapist can do is to model imperfection. He
Mhm.
was like, so let yourself be as messy as you possibly can. Mess up your words, right? Like, I don't have to really work at that. That comes naturally to me.
I'm like, do we
I'm
want
good
to
at
try
being
to mess
imperfect.
that up?
Right. But I love that so much. And it was so permission giving too for me as a new therapist or a therapist in training to hear such a seasoned clinician say, be imperfect intentionally. Right. And this idea of modeling that as a therapist for clients, and I laugh at myself all the time. I mean, I'm always constantly like, like drooling on myself or something like equally as graceful and embarrassing, stumbling on my rug or something, and I just laugh about it and think of Dr. Kim Matheny saying, okay, intentionally, right, model this, but we can model so much, like you said, risk taking, being okay with uncertainty, being okay with messing up, right?
Yeah.
Showing those vulnerable feelings of nervousness or fear or sadness when things don't go the way we'd hoped that they would go, or we're anticipating having to go into a situation that might be a challenging one, might be a little bit outside of our comfort zone.
Mhm.
There's a
Absolutely.
lot here. So in some ways, all we have to do is sit back and wait, right? And we watch our kids do things like behave socially in awkward ways and let the group dynamic inform different behavior, or we watch them use the wrong grammar in their essay for their English language arts class and trust that the teacher's going to correct that, right? Or we watch them not put on enough layers for a cold day, even though you've suggested otherwise, and they get cold and they learn from that, right? Or fill in the blank, right? There's lots of ways we can allow our children to make their own decisions, knowing that we might decide differently for them and that they can learn from the results of their actions organically, right? We kind of call that like natural consequences, allowing them to make a mistake. And then how big of a mistake are we going to allow them to make before we intervene?
Yes.
And then we
And
have
I'm
this
not
idea.
saying, right, and that's the key. You're not going to be totally hands off. And when there's a situation you need to intervene, and then you're like, sorry, make your own mistake. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of a nuance to it.
So what is it? How do parents know, Claudia? Where's the nuance?
I mean, I think it's kind of what you did with, Ellie when she was little, right? It's like, how big of a mistake is this going to be? I also think it depends on the age of your child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you've got an 18-year-old who's not doing homework and is somehow, set on not graduating high school on time, I think we as parents have to look at that being like, okay, is that life ending? No, it's not.
Right.
Is that for me as a parent what I want? No. If I'm going to be really honest with myself, am I a little embarrassed to have to tell my friends he's doing another year of high school? Yes, because here's the thing, as much as we can say our children's behavior doesn't reflect on us, every single parent walks around with the anxiety that their children's behavior reflects on them,
Right.
because people can be judgy, right? So, but we have to be really honest with ourselves about what is feeding our need to step in. And is our stepping in the long run going to help our kid, or is it going to hinder them in some other way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I work with kids that are doing like self-injury or have suicide, we're not asking parents to step back. I'm actually asking them to step in
Mm-hmm.
more, right? We're taking
Mm-hmm.
safety precautions, we're locking things up, we're monitoring.
My
Because
production.
that's a big risk to say, I'll let you make your decisions.
You
No,
learn the
like
hard way.
right? Like, no,
No.
sometimes there's no place for that.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
know, extreme substance use, if you're just going to sit back and pretend it's not happening, like that's also like, now we're being reckless as parents, right? Right.
Yep.
There is the other extreme, but it's thinking about like, what's the fallout of this? And is the fallout really as detrimental in the long run as it might feel in this moment? Because sometimes like, you know, your child not graduating high school in time might feel like a big deal, but in the grand scheme of life, maybe that year will give them a lot of perspective,
Right.
and motivate them for the future, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I think it's balancing all of that, but I think it's getting really honest with yourself as the parent on like, what's driving my need to jump in,
Mm-hmm.
and is it really necessary, or will they
Yeah.
survive just fine? Like in 5 years, is me calling the teacher about a C going to matter? Probably not. Maybe I shouldn't.
Well, and this reminds me of the podcast we did early on about kind of parenting philosophies and disciplinary approaches, so forth and so on. And one of the things that you said that really stuck with me was this idea of that you recommend people for your clients, and you did this for yourself, create an image in your mind of the type of human that you want to raise, right? And that's not too dissimilar from what I said a few moments ago about like, okay, stepping back 30,000 foot view and assessing your child or children's individual strengths or weaknesses, areas where they could benefit from growing, right? If you know that you want to raise a human who is, let's just throw out the word resilient, right? Because that's another topic that's been on my mind. Well, in order to be resilient, we have to go through struggle.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the story of the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. I use this so much in my office. There's this beautiful artisan here locally where we live. Her business is named Metamorph Blooms. She created it during COVID, during the lockdown. And what she does is she makes these beautiful orchid arrangements, and she attaches a monarch chrysalis on each one, where it's literally an actual monarch chrysalis. And once it gets to its home, the monarch butterfly will come out of its chrysalis and become a monarch. And then the orchid owner takes the monarch and says, thank you for coming, and takes him outside and releases him to the world. So I have one in my office, and the little former chrysalis is still attached. I'm looking at it right now. And I often will use that as an illustration for so many life lessons with my clients. And one being this idea of the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. And a lot of people don't think about that process, but if anyone were to ever interfere with the butterfly coming out of the cocoon by trying to help it, right? So like if you saw a butterfly struggling to get out of its cocoon and you came along and said, oh gosh, that looks really difficult, let me fix it, right? Let me go ahead and cut this crystal, or cut this, whatever you call it, I don't know what the heck you call it, away, so the butterfly has an easier time getting out. Well, what I have learned will happen to that butterfly. I hope no scientists are going to correct me who might be listening to this, but this is what I was taught. So what happens is that the butterfly therefore doesn't have the struggle necessary to build the strength in its wings. And so it gets out, if you rescue it from that experience, it gets out, it doesn't have the strength it needs to be able to fly, and it's sitting prey for predators and dies very fast because something bigger is going to come and take it for a nice juicy meal because it can't fly. So what we're actually, when we try to rescue, we're actually creating a lot of harm to that butterfly. And I think some of the times that's so true for our kiddos, right? When we talk about like the helicopter parent style, we talked about that, you know, kind of this overly protective parenting style where children are not allowed opportunities to learn skills because parents do that for them, or to learn from consequences of their actions because parents rescue them from that. And then they become not as resilient because they haven't had to do that struggle. And like you said, learn that the struggle is temporary.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, and I think there's you can't get through life without struggle, right? Mm-hmm. Or messing up or failure. Like someone's going to be smarter, faster, stronger, more successful. Like it's just part of life, you know? And there's so much value in learning to keep that in perspective and to take the lessons with you and not let a moment like that defeat you.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times when we haven't had struggle or faced failure, it doesn't have to be a huge failure to take us down, because
Yeah.
any failure is like too much, you know?
Yeah.
But I think as parents, also really important to become aware of our own struggles with failure, right? Are we as the parent perfectionistic, and are we expecting that from our children?
Yeah.
Right? And are we
Yes.
diving in because we want everything to look perfect and put together all the time, and having a kid that's not and messing up is a problem, right?
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, I mean, and so kind of evaluating that. How are we showing our kids we respond to failure? When we mess up, what are we doing? Right? How do we handle that? And it can be something little, like, like
Burnt dinner.
spill something. Yeah.
Right.
It's like, how do we handle that mistake? Are we like, oh, you messed up the table and freaking out? Or are we just like,
Right.
can you, just go get a rag and wipe it? It's fine. We'll clean it up.
Right.
There's a very different, right? It's just like, even, and that's what I'm saying, like when you start when they're young, right? Because when you're little, those are the kind of things that happen. You knock something over, you probably broke a thing or two because you were touching something, like these things happen. But kind of setting that in motion, because it all builds on itself, right? It's like we just kind of keep building. And by the time you're kids and adolescent, I mean, there is some level of having to let them individuate, which they're supposed to be doing, and live their life, right? And your influence and impact, and to be honest with you, the things you know and don't know about. I work with teenagers. I know what their parents know and don't know. You know what I mean? And it's like they're making decisions all the time that you can't catch. You won't know.
Right. You just hope that by the time they get out of your reaches that far, that you've instilled some good values in them, right? I remember my parents saying that to me, and it's like, oh my gosh, right? I remember my parents saying when I would leave the house, remember who you are. I also grew up in a religious household, and they would say, remember who you are and remember whose you are. And for them, that meant God's, right? And so what they were trying to do is, I'm leaving the house, truthfully, to go and do really bad things. I did lots of really bad things. Like, they're like, remember how we raised you and remember that you belong to God. And I'm like, okay, sweet. And I'd hop in my convertible and light a Marlboro light, and peel out of the driveway. It didn't work that well for me. I had to learn from the consequences of my own behavior, right? To our point here, I had to learn. It wasn't from what my mother or father or preacher or Sunday school teacher told me to do. It was for me being in the world, doing things on my own self, right? And saying that worked well, or that did not work out well for me. And so let me recalibrate for things that did not work out so well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I had, I would say a lot of freedom as a kid. Like we always joke that I like parented myself, but I don't think that's true. But like, I just didn't have overly involved parents that were like highly anxious about parenting. Different time too, right? Like, but I was outside for hours unsupervised. And if there was adults, we didn't see them. Maybe they peeked out their windows, but it wasn't like obvious, right? We felt alone. Maybe it's more about how I felt than what was, my parents could have been following me and I would have had no idea, right? But like, I felt alone, right? But in a good way, like unsupervised, right? I was outside with friends from like 9 a.m. till it got dark on weekends, completely alone running the streets. And again, different time. Lots of kids did that, right? But like,
which I can't even imagine now. I was thinking about that the other day. I did the same thing. I rode bikes all over. I was out climbing trees, different friends' houses. I don't know if my parents ever knew where I was. And they were like pretty strict parents. They weren't like these laissez-faire, like go do hippy dippy parents, nothing against them, but that was not who I was raised by. But I mean, I can't imagine in this day and age, my child being, I remember fifth grade, which is Ellie's age and Ansley's age. I remember being gone for hours on my bike.
Yeah.
And, neighboring streets where my parents wouldn't have known what street I was on. They would have known if a car had come and picked me up.
Right. But think about all of the like the risk you got to take in that,
Mhm.
or
Right.
feeling like you were taking a risk, even if you weren't, just because you knew you were on your own. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I had a lot of that. I had a lot of like, in high school, I did go to high school in Germany, so it was a little different. We took trains everywhere. And there's like just culturally, kids are a little more free and just go. But
Yeah.
I mean, we would take the train into downtown every Friday night, and we would. And my mom did say to me once, "I don't like it, but
Mhm.
at least I know where you are and who you're with,
Mhm.
and like." It's fine. And interestingly, like I was a pretty, and I think some of this is temperament because my friends had the same freedom and they did not choose to use their freedom the same way. But I was a pretty reserved person about it.
Mhm.
I mean, I had friends in high school. Most of my friends in high school, probably all of them, would drink. I didn't drink in high school. I would have like my soda at a bar. Like I'm in the bar, but I'm not drinking in the bar. It's like I was just pretty
Right.
reserved about it. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know why. Maybe that's just temperament more so than anything. But there were so many opportunities for us to feel
Mhm.
independent, but
Yeah.
knowing, I mean, we still had to answer to our parents and they were still there.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Yeah.
know a couple of weeks ago, Ansley went on a play date and the mom was like, "Is it okay if they go do lunch? There's a market about a mile away and they walk there all the time to get lunch." And I'm like,
Whoa.
so I'm like, okay. So I hand my daughter some cash and I'm like getting in my car and I'm like, woo! But she walked with her friend 30 minutes in one direction, lunched on a salad with some salmon,
Oh my gosh.
Starbursts, we had to throw in the kids up there, and had lunch at this little marketplace and then walked 30 minutes back, and everything was fine. And I will tell you that I was nervous this
Yeah.
entire time she's at the play date, but
Mm-mm-mm.
she was like beaming with happiness
Yeah.
because she is responsible, she is capable, we have a lot of conversations. She's, a responsible kid as much as you can be a 10, right?
Mhm.
So she has the skill set. And in that moment, I was like, I've got to calm myself because this is not something she's not capable of doing.
Mhm.
But it
So
scared me.
so what do you think about this, right? So you mentioned that, times have changed since we were kids, right? And there are more risks out there, let's say, right? More threats to our children, perhaps.
I don't know that there are.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Well, the internet throws a little bit of a different wrench. Okay, so like
True.
online, like the
Mhm.
social, we can get into the social media thing. That is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
That clearly we did not have as kids because it was not a thing. People had to
Yeah.
like physically find us to mess with us. It couldn't be some stranger online in God knows where. So in that sense, yes, I think it's a little bit different.
Mhm.
But if you take social media out of it, I don't know that it's any more dangerous. I actually think it's
Mhm.
probably less dangerous, but we hear about it more. Now you
Mhm.
hear
That
news
might
is
be true.
24/7, right?
Yeah,
So you
that's true.
hear
That's a
about
good
the
point.
kidnapping in
Right.
Omaha, whereas in 1980, whatever, if it didn't happen down the street, you would have never known.
True. That's a really good
So
point. So is it
we
more
know
dangerous?
more, but I
Yeah.
think crimes against children actually, I think statistically have decreased over the years.
Interesting.
Because you also have to fade, like if you look at kidnappings and stuff, a lot of those are family kidnappings. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like not all kidnappings are random stranger pulling up taking your kid.
Yeah, true.
Um,
Okay, so then to your point, right? So maybe it's not that it's more dangerous now, but we give our kids less freedom now or feel less comfortable with the same freedoms that you and I enjoyed, however many years ago that was, 30 years plus
just a few
ago.
years ago.
Right? Where maybe it's not any more dangerous now for our kids to do the same things that we did without feeling like we were unsafe or without our parents feeling like we were unsafe, but we hear about it more, right? We hear about it because of social media, because of the news maybe being more robust than it was back then, regardless of the outlet for that. And so then wise parents are saying, oh my gosh, well, I did hear about that thing in Kansas. And when you start using that kind of way of decision making that we described earlier, that I started when Ellie was a toddler, like how bad could this hurt, right? What's the risk of this?
Yeah.
And then yes or no. Well, gosh, well, that child in Omaha, right? So then it's a no versus or
Yeah.
You harness your own anxiety and say, well, okay, what's the likelihood of that happening?
Right. Like
I don't know.
statistically, this
Yeah.
is the challenge I have because statistically something can be very rare.
Uh-huh.
But that doesn't diminish the pain someone feels when they experience it. And I
That's
have to hold those both those things, right? But you know, yes, I often sit with myself and say, well, if it went south, I'm going to give myself the I shouldn't have let her go. I knew it was a bad it.
right.
But again, at what cost?
Yeah.
And I think also we're looking at the world. I don't think the world's gotten more dangerous. I do think news is creating a little bit more anxiety for all of us,
Mhm.
but you're seeing it from your perspective. Like I used to walk by a playground and be like, that looks awesome. I walk by most playgrounds now and I'm like, what a death trap. Like, who made this for children? You know what I'm talking about, right? Even the
Uh-huh.
slides. I'm like, why won't you do? Okay. The playgrounds haven't changed that much.
Right.
My perspective on them has, because when I was 10, I didn't see danger. Now,
Yep.
as an adult, and more specifically as a parent, everything is a threat to my kid,
Yeah.
right? And so it's balancing that the change in perspective that we have. Like our kids aren't viewing the world the way we are viewing the world,
Hmm.
you know. But it's a constant negotiation because, right, if I had let Ansley go, which I did let her go, but if something had happened, we'd probably be having a very different conversation, right? But it's like this idea that you can't predict every outcome.
Right. Yep. You're just rolling the dice and you're having to make the best decisions you can. Okay.
Yeah,
So, like in summary, can you talk to, do you want to put you on the spot like this?
I love it. Yes.
Can you speak to, so okay, as somebody, so I work with adults, right? So my perspective is more that hindsight perspective. I hear so many people tell me how their childhood influenced how they are now, right?
Yes.
And making those connections for better, for worse, or for neutral, right? But for you, so let's say, for example, for right now, we're talking to parents of children who are still in the home where they still have that more power, right? More power to influence their children's experiences.
Okay.
What are some of the things that parents should be paying attention to, on the lookout for, that might tell them that their kids need more mistakes, need more risks, need more struggle, need more failure, need more responsibility? Fill in the blank.
Yeah. I think part of the reason people don't do it is because it's hard to spot in the moment. It's really easy to look at your 25-year-old going, they're not equipped for life and adulthood. I should have X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think, and the way I handle it, and don't, this may not work for everyone, but again, it's like, okay, that moment of stepping back saying, what do I want my kid to be at 18, 20, 40, whatever age, right? And are we having an existence that can promote that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want my kids to be independent, self-sufficient, problem solvers, right? Ideally make good decisions with the reality that, like, brain development hinders a little bit of good decision making. Every single person on this planet made not so great decisions between 12 and 25
Okay.
on varying degrees, right. So you know thinking about, am I giving them opportunities to fail? And again, it doesn't have to be these huge catastrophic failures. Failure can be you didn't study for the test and you failed it, and no, I'm not calling your teacher to get
Mm-hmm.
you out of this.
Right. Oh,
it's
we had that one week.
yeah, it's small stuff.
Mhm. Can you
It's
email Mr. Strider? Nope, sure cannot.
That's right. But it doesn't always have to be this like huge, right? Like risky behavior your kids are
Right.
engaging in. It's a lot of those small things that build up, right? That lesson in that moment is, there are if you don't want to do the work for something, you
Mhm.
don't get the credit for it, right? That was a choice you made. And that's the consequence of it. I will not be intervening, calling the teacher, right? Trying to set up extra credit to boost your grade. Those are the things I think we can look at. Like, are our kids having opportunities where they can mess up and we can hold their mistakes for them without trying to course correct it? without problem solving it. Maybe you should do extra credit, get that grade up. If your kid's not choosing to do extra credit themselves, like you can't drive that train for them,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
So
And I
kids who
think having
aren't
faith
taking
that our kids can
responsibility.
come around.
Mm-hmm. Say more about that one.
You know, I talk to a lot of parents and adults really as well, some of my adult clients, right, where it's like they looked like they were heading on one path as a kid, and then they switched paths
Mm-hmm.
and they worked it out.
Oh yeah, I probably should be an inmate somewhere.
Yeah, like I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying, you know, their child is now graduated high school but is taking college classes, but took some time off and wasn't going to go to college and wasn't really going to do much of anything, and they have changed their mind, and now they're a little behind, and they realize all their friends are at college and now they want to go to a 4-year school, and now they're having to do the work to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But it came from the child and the parents
Yeah.
having the patience to say, okay, right, like gotta go get a job, do something, but this isn't, if you don't want to do this, then it's your life, right? And being able to step back and tolerate that, even though I guarantee you they were like, you know, screaming inside, but being able to have faith that like your kid might have to move through the process, right? If your child is set on going to Harvard and you're like, you're not Harvard material, or that's a reach or whatever, let them apply, don't dissuade them, right? Like let it just kind of naturally unfold,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
So
And
I
be
love
okay
that.
with
So
that.
not dissuading, not intervening, not course correcting, not rescuing, right? Not
Mm,
rescuing behavior unless children really need to be rescued, right? So basically, like if they're capable of doing something for themselves, let them do it for themselves. And if
yeah,
it was a responsibility that's an appropriate age related responsibility and they messed it up, right? Then they need to take accountability for that, like the not studying for the test.
yeah, because I think
And
the lack of accountability
yeah.
is what gets us into a lot of trouble as adults, right? That gets us into issues, into troubles with our marriage because we can't take accountability for our own actions and behaviors and how they impact other
Yeah.
people. It gets us in
Right.
trouble at our jobs. I hear a
Yep.
lot of people struggling with, you know, coworkers or employees that are really struggling to take responsibility of their own stuff
Right.
because they didn't have to.
That's right. And then one other thing you said that I want to highlight before we wrap up is kind of the flip side of that coin is paying attention for children who seem to be risk averse. So more timid or worrisome or self-conscious, perhaps wanting to play it safe, afraid to step outside of what would be a too small comfort zone, right? Where we would
Yeah.
want them to be able to take a little bit more risks or engage in more normative type of behaviors or experiences without fear, anxiety, trepidation, and so forth. And kind of having that, like, I'm going to nudge you a little bit outside your comfort zone because I've been on the planet a little bit longer and it's my job to help shape you.
That's right.
And
And just try things, right? I don't think I'll be good
yeah,
at that. It's okay. Just
let's do
try.
it.
Just
Yeah, let's
try.
give it a shot.
Just try. Maybe you'll like
Who
it. Maybe you
cares?
won't.
Right.
Just try.
Right. And who
Right?
cares if you're not good? That's right.
Yeah. It's again, it's just make the effort and not letting them, you know, we had this with Ansley the other day because she was doing a play at school and not all the kids were cooperating, but she was the director and she couldn't fire.
Oh,
She's like, well, what do people do in Hollywood? I'm like, well, if people act up, they get fired, but like you can't fire your classmates. You don't have a pool of talent to pull from. So she was struggling with getting people on board and her teacher was watching her struggle. And her teacher said to me, I am not getting involved. Like they need to work through the struggle. Right. She's like, I gave suggestions of maybe give people a break every now and then, like take a 30-minute break, come back to this, whatever. But what ended up happening is Ansley was getting frustrated. And I was like, well, like you're committed to this. You have to follow through. It's really hard. You know, you control what you can, you let go of what's not your responsibilities. We had a lot of talk about that. And she was not a happy camper for a week. But it all came together and it was fine. And the process was really painful for her,
mm-hmm.
but no one was going to let her quit. She still had this deadline. She was not allowed to cancel. Kudos to her teacher who was like, this is happening on this date. And like, whatever comes out, right? And it was fine, but not letting them quit because something is hard. So we've had a lot of those issues on sports teams. My kids decide they no longer like fill in the blank activity. It's happened numerous times. I do not force them to do it for years, but you are expected to complete what you've committed to. So if you've committed to a season, you will play the season, right? You will support your team for the season. If you're committing to whatever time frame you have been committed to is what we will complete, whether you like it or not, right? But that's the thing too. Sometimes we have to stick with something when we don't like it, when we feel uncomfortable, when we want to run.
Life lessons.
Yeah, and you do it in those little ways, you know?
Okay, so in general, or typical rather, Claudia and Katie fashion, we've not given you any direct advice. And
Just more food for thought.
But yeah, just more two therapists, moms, and a mic. Just talking around and through all these nuances, because like probably everything we will ever talk to you about, there are no right or wrongs when it comes to humans and raising humans and being a human in the planet, on the planet, in the planet, whatever it is. And, you know, we're all just bozos on the bus, as the saying goes, right? Claudia and I included. We're just trying to do the best we can with the
Yeah,
humans.
well, and there's no advice we can give on a podcast, sadly. I think we can stimulate thought and conversation and maybe shed light on a perspective someone hasn't had before.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to, and this is where like people come to us, right? Because when you come to me as a client, like we're diving into your kid, their temperament, your parenting, your stuff. Like we can dive into that really individualized thing. We just can't do that on a podcast. And I know you do that with clients too. You dive into their world, but we don't have answers. There's no one size fits all, which is the challenge. But I think we can at least produce ideas and, you know.
So hopefully we've given you some things to think about.
Hopefully.
If you do listen to this and have any follow-up questions or comments or thoughts or ideas or spin-off topics that were inspired by listening to us today or any of our shows, please make sure you comment on our social media posts. We are on Instagram and Facebook. Claudia's Mighty Oak Parenting. I'm Rob and Katie Truax. And let us know what you think. Let us know what questions, thoughts, opinions you have, unless they're bad and they keep them to yourself. So I'm just kidding.